into positions of hopelessness and helplessness. The government gives them the drugs, builds bigger prisons, passes a 3-strike law, and then wants us to sing God Bless America. No, 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 not God Bless America. God damn America. That's in the Bible for killing innocent people. God damn America for treating us citizens as less than human. God damn America as long as she tries to act like she is God and she is supreme.
And this is it. And this is the show. Hey, everybody. I start the show now. Jake Flores is gone, lost at sea. Somewhere over the Pacific. Where is he? Who knows? I'm Alex Patak. I'm here hosting the podcast today with the one and only world famous Anders Lee.
Anders Lee here.
That's right, folks. We're back and we're doing climate change episode number 47 on the Pod Damn America podcast. Everyone's favorite topic, the world in flames.
12 away from solving it.
We get closer every time. It's unrealistic, 60. But yeah, 60 is going to do it.
Yep.
As a materialist, you need to make conservative estimates that if you want them to come to life. And I think 60 is a reasonable number for society to change around our podcast. We have a very special guest today joining the show. I didn't ask your credits in advance. What's your fanciest title?
Professor.
Okay.
You
can do better than that.
You're not a doctor?
I am a doctor.
Okay.
We have a doctor, professor.
I'm not the kind of doctor that helps people or gets paid a lot of money, but I am a doctor.
The most noble kind. Today we have Dr. Professor Matt Huber is joining the show to talk about his new book, Climate Change as Class War, Building Socialism on a Warming Planet. Matt, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
I just want to say great title for the book.
Great title. And I will say also a great cover. I know authors are generally not involved in cover decisions, but what really struck me about this book about climate change, no green. On the
interesting.
Seriously, it feels like maybe that was a bit intentional in terms of trying to get a little more serious and not get distracted by the fluffy good stuff. Do you have any insight into why red and black were the chosen color scheme?
I don't. It's actually, if you look, it's actually basically, I don't want to get Verso in trouble here, but it's kind of a stolen model of I believe it's a German publisher in the 70s. I think I'm going to butcher this, but they're called like Sucrump or something like that. And they had this same style, like big stark black covers with font that's starkly red or other, like they did other color combos, but it looks it's like basically a shout out to that 1970s, maybe early 80s style.
Cool.
You have the same font as The Godfather. Is that intentional?
Yes. We're trying to really do some meta stuff here. I do like your point, though. I never thought that there's no green. And one of the things maybe I'm kind of reacting to is for basically in academia and activist spaces, like for the last 40 years, there's been this idea that we're going to create what's called like a red-green alliance, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're going to bring the green stuff and bring the red stuff, and we're all going to sing Kumbaya and come together and solve these issues. And that hasn't really worked, right? And so one of the more strident parts of the book is just basically trying to get us back to the red basics, which is back to the socialist basics about thinking about class struggle and class power as being the key issues and building a working class movement to solve these types of things. So
yeah, you've avoided the tropes. There's no green. And then the other thing that you get sometimes is like a sad lost penguin alone on a big white field.
Yeah, we had a polar bear on a the glacier that's the ice that's melted and that's off to sea. That was the alternative cover, and I nixed that in favor of the stark red and black. So
it does break my heart every time seeing the little polar bear try to swim. That is really hard to watch.
It's brutal.
I thought
An
the cover
image
would
the
be,
world just keeps showing me since I was around 15 years old. It has not gotten any easier to look at.
Well, yeah, the alternative is like the polar bear with a hard hat. The polar bear working on some green. We're going to employ the polar bears.
Yeah.
You're punching in at the Coca-Cola factory. There's no time. It's a big episode, everybody. Matt, one thing I loved about your book is that the first thing you do, and this is right in the introduction, is you confront the framing of the climate movement. We were saying before the episode started, we've done a lot of different climate episodes on our show, and they do usually tackle new IPCC reports or current events in climate, but it does feel kind of samey after a while of understanding it's time to get to socialism. If we had socialism, we could address climate change, but we don't have any.
Right.
Your book starts with the feeling of guilt, very popular in the climate movement. If you're a climate activist now, you probably got involved because you recognize climate change as a existential issue, and your role in it maybe compels you through your lifestyle to get involved. But you kind of you turn the conversation on its head by examining the fault, quote unquote, of a consumer versus a producer in our society.
Yeah. So in one sort of obvious way, like our lives are connected to emissions and the climate crisis. And, you're driving a car and those emissions are going in the atmosphere. It seems very clear and obvious that all our sort of consumer actions are connected. So that can create these feelings of like, oh, I'm participating, I'm complicit, I'm causing the climate breakdown. But that the oil and the fossil fuel industry has been happy to provide lots of ideas for how we can think about it that way, which puts all the onus on us consumers. So like the very idea of a carbon footprint was invented by British Petroleum in 2004 as part of their Beyond Petroleum campaign, which was sort of, people made fun of it back then because it was so clear they were not that interested in getting beyond. Then they spilled like 1 trillion tons of oil into the Gulf of Mexico about 6 years later. But under capitalism, like consumers aren't just isolated pods, doing our actions in the market as just completely by ourselves, right? So we're connected in very specific ways to other producers who produce this energy for profit, and they are the ones who are really benefiting from these relationships, right? And when you're consuming gasoline, the person who sold you that gasoline is making all the money. You're just schlepping to work or whatever. Like you're picking up your children from daycare. You're trying to just survive in a very brutal, sort of alienating capitalist system. And to put all, carbon footprints puts all the responsibility for emissions on your consumption and it just completely erases the role of these owners who control production, who profit off production, and who are really like much smaller group of society, right? When we think about it, it's just all of us. We're all there's diffuse responsibility and we're all kind of complicit. It does make it seem like, oh, there's no way we're going to change billions of consumers' decisions. But if you think about it, like it's actually a small minority of society, a class of owners who controls production for profit. And it's their power that's really inhibiting us from addressing this. And we need to figure out a way to confront and overcome their power. It's maybe not an easier task ahead, but it's certainly a simpler task. It makes sense. Like all we see in our lives is consumption, and so it makes sense that we kind of concentrate on that. And under capitalism, we don't have a lot of freedom outside of the realm of the market, and we get to choose what we get to consume. So it seems like this is the place where politics is. This is the place where choice is. But what Marx, sorry to bring him up, but by
the way, don't bring up Marx if you can avoid it. I meant to mention that.
I worry about going too far into the abstract theorization. But he called it literally the hidden abode of production, where he argued is where the secret of profit is made and where workers are exploited in factories. And I think similarly, for the climate crisis, you do have to go to these places we don't see in our everyday lives, like steel plants or cement plants that are responsible for like nearly 20% of global carbon emissions, huge industrial agriculture operations. This productive sphere is where most of the emissions are coming from and where most of the money is being made. And so we really need to focus more on that.
Right. Our society is structured around capitalists controlling our economy. And that is an intentional design. To leave them out of the solution for climate change is impossible.
Right.
But I just wanted to highlight you had such a fantastic example in this that I think if you ever end up talking to liberal friends or family about climate change, there can be a very easy target that it's easy to get hung up on, which is the obnoxious Hummer owner, which you talked about.
I hate him so much.
Because if you internalize your emissions as guilt. And that's the thing. I have a Prius from 2010. It has 200,000 miles on it.
Good on you, man. Good on you.
You know what? It's actually fantastic for me right now that gas is $7 a gallon. So I'm feeling pretty good about it. But, I hate the big Hummer owner who's spewing, 30 gallons every tank that they fill up every other day. But the social repulsion you feel to this person does not actually reflect any difference in their relation to production than the one that you have. If somebody works in advertising and gets paid $80,000 a year to go buy their big obnoxious house and car, they're as powerless as you are to solve the situation, even if they do things you do not like.
Right. Yeah. So like if the Hummer owner also happens to be the CEO of a petrochemical company, like what they do in that sphere of their life, organize, a global network of chemical factories that's spewing billions of tons of carbon. They're doing that for 8 to 12 hours a day. And, that is much more impactful to the climate. It's where all their money comes from that allows them to buy a Hummer or drive around, fill up the gas tank every couple days, whatever you need to do if you drive a Hummer. And it's just very weird that we would only focus on the Hummer, which is a drop in the bucket compared to their role as this sort of owner who's making all this money over organizing, fossil fuel carbon intensive production systems. And it also leads to very strange things like, maybe a Hollywood actor could have a good example, like an advertising executive who makes like, I don't know, $1 million a year, could have a Hummer and have a higher carbon footprint than a fossil fuel executive that takes public transit and lives in Manhattan, right? And lives like is a vegetarian, let's say. And
Warren Buffett.
Like no one would ever say that advertising executive is more responsible for climate change than the fossil fuel executive, right? But the carbon footprint makes it seem like they are, right? Because they just have a higher. So the rich do destroy the climate, but they don't destroy it mostly through how they consume. It's about what they own and how they make their profit and how they organize, like you said, like how they control everything in society that we need. And we really need to focus more on that.
This is just my favorite anecdote about public eco warriors in their private lives. Leonardo DiCaprio apparently has an addiction to yachts. Like he has to spend every waking moment of his private life on a large boat adrift at sea somewhere, even though it's like single-handedly the worst thing you can do before you go star in your movie about climate change. That just really tickles me. But, and we have full forgiveness for Comrade DiCaprio the minute he is able to turn in these executives and expropriate their values.
It's funny because I remember watching the interview, the cast making the rounds after Don't Look Up came out, and they asked, hey, what's your solution? What do you think is the solution? And his was just vote. He do a little bit of research, make sure the candidate you're voting for has a couple, buzzwords about climate change or global warming, and vote for them. And that was it. I still think Don't Look Up is a good movie, but it's a separate discussion.
Which we already have another full episode about. So feel free to get behind the paywall and listen to that one. But
get real mad at us.
This does flawlessly segue into the next place to take the conversation, because you have a lot to say about the current climate movement. So I wanted to start about the beginning of your framing of the discussion, which is environmentalism based on your relationship to labor, right? Relationship to industry, and the people most active in the climate movement right now and where they fall on that spectrum. Because you have a lot of scientists, you have a lot of college educated professionals. You talk a lot about the climate radical, which is a position I really strongly associated myself with, which is somebody who went to college but isn't doing that well and becomes very concerned about climate change and uses all this knowledge capital that they're trying to accrue to make a job to maybe do something about it.
Yeah.
Specifically, Bill McKibben comes up a few times at the beginning, and 350.org.
Bill McKibben, who, is sort of one of the heroes of the climate movement and is seen as, he started this foundational organization, 350.org. But what I try to argue is he's sort of kind of prototypical of this, what I call professional class mode of climate politics. And the key, because this tends to, I argue it's a class that is basically trying to use credentials, whether that be education or licenses or other types of credentials in the labor market, to try to carve out some kind of advantage in this highly unequal, barbaric neoliberal capitalist system. And, you've heard, people with college degrees tend to do better, and et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, so this tends to create a class of people that are highly educated in the sort of knowledge economy, which means they are kind of separated from material industrial production, which is really the source of the climate crisis, the thing we need to transform and sort of seize, if you will. But Bill McKibben's kind of a classic example of this. He's just like me, professor at a college. He's an author, famously writing about climate change as early as the 1980s. But he really does frame it as a politics over knowledge. And that's really evidenced by the fact he named his organization 350.org, which, if you don't know what that means, it means the goal we want is to get to 350 parts per million in the atmosphere of carbon. And that's what science says is like the safe level of carbon that can be in the atmosphere. And so,
what are we at right now, by the way? Was it like 425 or something?
I think I think last week it may have gotten to 420. Yay, right?
Nice.
But that's really bad. It's really high. It's the highest.
It's actually very alarming.
It's not something to celebrate with whatever you would celebrate with.
Actually, stop smoking weed. Your weed is contributing to the warming of the planet.
That was the marijuana industry's doing. The legal marijuana industry was trying to have like a sales bonanza once we hit 420.
Yeah, we're going to lose 60% of biodiversity, and that will achieve the perfect strain of weed.
I will say with McKibben and 350, I remember, I guess 10 years ago now when I was in college, their sort of big mission was about endowments, and they were trying to appeal directly to college students to confront their university's endowments, which are, funds that have all kinds of investments in all kinds of terrible things, despite being, nice, fancy liberal arts colleges. Where did that go? And why was that perhaps not the most politically sound strategy for fighting climate change?
It's still going, it's the divestment movement. And there's a lot of activists still on college campuses that are trying to get their institutions to divest from fossil fuels. My university, Syracuse, actually claimed to do it, but it became very clear that you can claim to do it, but you can still have these sort of weird funds that are sort of have their tentacles in other things which probably include fossil fuels. So it became a much more like rhetorical game of claiming divestment. But to me, it was a continuation of a kind of, market-based or, we're going to like solve this through influencing the market. And Bill McKibben, actually his new thing he's been writing about lately is to get rich boomers to move their money already. To move their money out of, because he's basically like, hey, these are the people that have money in our society. They're They're like me. They're rich boomers.
Yeah. I feel
that's
bad.
That's a lot of capital, and we can shift that capital if we influence the boomers. It's quite stunning. But I did want to mention one more thing he did. After he launched 350, he had this viral article in Rolling Stone called "The Most Important Numbers on Earth," and it's all about all these numbers, like how many gigatons of fossil fuels are left, how we need to get to 350. How much profits are to be made on these gigatons. But then he launched something called the Do the Math Tour, where he gave lectures about how we need to do this math and we need to figure out these numbers and figure out what our carbon budget is. And that's professional class politics. Like, we're going to do math, we're going to know the science, we're going to know the numbers, and then everyone's going to get on board because they're going to learn the truth, right? And that is, to me, not a very effective way to kind of build a mass coalition, because a lot of people don't want to do math, don't care, and aren't really concerned about what the science has to say. People have much more immediate material concerns in their lives than that. So
this plays directly into Andrew's favorite topic, which is holding Al Gore personally accountable for modern climate change under the ideology of awareness. Inconvenient Truth comes out in the early 2000s, late 90s? 2006.
Yeah.
Not even early 2000. It comes out. Everyone is suddenly very aware of climate change because they've seen the most drowning bears they've historically ever seen. And it really upsets them.
Al Gore on the weird crane that puts them up to show the emissions.
It goes too high up.
It goes
the
really
shot
high.
Can't handle how high up it goes. They have to back up and then get a bigger graph. What a film. But it does tap into the core of the argument here, which is although being aware of climate change is nice, and divesting your school's budget from the oil lobby may be good, it is not sufficient in that it does not strategically target the elements that need to be isolated here. Off of Bill McKibben, the 350.org, I believe, if I'm getting this right, is taken from a paper from James Hansen.
Yeah.
Who is now part of the Citizens Climate Lobby, who is maybe would you say they're like the dominant institution at the front of the eco movement in America for whatever exists?
I would say they're a very important organization in what I would call a kind of liberal climate movement that is very attached to market-based policies.
Right.
Go ahead.
That's what kind of shocked me about that. I've been hearing about James Hansen for a long time. Not the Muppets guy, to be clear, but he has been, he gets arrested and he gives these very sort of dramatic, impassioned speeches about action on climate change. And I guess I wasn't paying too close attention, but as you highlight, he has made clear several times that this cannot, the solution cannot come through the state. It has to. It's like this religious belief in markets that somehow, someday, despite all evidence to the contrary, if we finesse it just right, a new industry will pop up and replace greenhouse gases.
Yeah, and Obama, tried his best to pass a policy that was market-based called cap and trade, that the Republicans basically called cap and tax, and created this sort of mass movement against. But then trying to recoup his legacy in the later years of his administration, he tried to push through something called the Clean Power Plan, which actually was going to be a much more state regulatory solution to climate by forcing power plants to just decarbonize. And James Hansen criticized it for being too heavy-handed. He said government shouldn't be making that kind of decision over what energy we're using. So really, stunning. But the Citizens Climate Lobby has just put all their organizing into this one policy, which is called a carbon fee and dividend. They call it a fee because they know that the word tax is politically unpopular in America. And so fee sounds a little more fun and neutral. The dividend part is that they redistribute all the money from the tax/fee to households, which they claim will make it remarkably popular, although there's been research recently that disproves that assumption. But the reason they make the dividend redistribute to households is because they insist that this is what they call a revenue neutral policy, which means the revenue you generate from it will not grow government, right? And they do this because they think they're going to win over right-wing anti-government people, Republicans, by saying, hey, this policy doesn't grow government. It doesn't expand governmental power. It just gives money to everyday people. Anyone that's following the climate crisis should know by now that it's going to take massive public investment and huge amounts of revenue for the government to like build out this infrastructure. And so they have this delusional idea that they're going to create this bipartisan consensus around this carbon fee and dividend. And they have maybe one or two Republicans to this policy, one of which famously became a climate believer, became a strong, his name is Bob Inglis, and I believe South Carolina. And he became a strong climate advocate and then swiftly was voted out of office by a radical Tea Partier in 2014. So this idea that they're going to create this bipartisan climate policy, win over Republicans, is just crazy. And it's all based on this idea that these policies are really smart and they channel market incentives by charging a fee on carbon to get the market to solve it by itself. And one of the things that really I find it pretty funny actually is one of their slogans that I found on their website is that we're going to outsmart climate change. Right. This, to me, again, like typified professional class politics. Like climate change is really bad. It's getting worse, but we're smart enough because we've got the credentials to outsmart it with our lovely policies that we've constructed.
Right. Well, that makes me, so I think there's a figure like it's down to in the 30% of Americans who actually believe in climate change at this point. I hope I read that wrong, but that seems like that might be the case.
What does believe mean in this sentence?
Think that it's going to cause, huge catastrophe and be a disaster, as the science points to. But how do we address that? Do we try to convince those people, or do we just say, look, we have these jobs and they will make your life easier, and this will bring down the cost of living, et cetera? Should we still make a scientific argument to what is probably a majority of Americans?
I wish I had these numbers. They're buried in the book somewhere, but I think that it's actually a bit higher in terms. The key question, you can go to this Yale website called Yale Opinion Maps, where they crunch all the data. The key question is, do you believe that climate change is human caused? Because that's actually the political question. You talk to any right-wing person, they'll be like, yeah, the climate's changing, but it's not us that's doing it, right? It's part of the natural cycles. This is what you'll hear from,
There's a fun graph that goes back a million years where you're like, you see the graph, it's down and then it's up. And so that's it for us.
Right.
We had a good run.
One of the other really important questions that they ask in the Yale Opinion Climate thing is, do you think climate change will affect you personally? And that number is really stunningly high in terms of people don't think it will affect them personally. Like most people, even if they believe it's human cause, it's happening, they don't think it's a big problem for them. And that is unfortunate. But it does kind of give evidence to the fact that we do have to offer more than just this is real, it's happening, and you better be terrified. Otherwise, we're all going to die, right? You need to offer people something like, the Green New Deal, which was going to give a job guarantee and, folded in things like Medicare for all. So the idea is that climate politics to actually win over a majority is going to have to offer people real material benefits, real improvements to their lives, and has to be much more than just saying this is scientifically true and therefore you should just accept that we need to do all these policies because of that, because of the truth, right? But I think if we can attach some sort of scientific argument about climate change being real to these more material benefits, that's fine, right? We don't just. Sometimes I think people think we're just going to fool the working class masses by goodies like jobs and healthcare and then smuggle in the climate. But I think you can do both, right? You can say this is about addressing climate change, but it's also improving your life in these direct ways. And you don't necessarily have to really get your head around the greenhouse effect to understand those material improvements.
Okay. Well, it appears we've stumbled onto the strategy section of the book. And I was going to save this for later, but this is the spicy stuff. This is the hot take of the book. You want this out in front. You have a term, I believe you came up with that you use in the book called socialism in one sector. It has the strategy to transform society within a capitalist system to address climate change. What is socialism in one sector, and why is it the strategy to beat for operating in the system?
I have to admit that was a cheeky kind of a reference to our good friend, comrade Stalin.
Yes, we've had him on the show. He's a great guy.
He advocated socialism. Well, this is seen as when the Bolshevik revolution sort of falls apart, when Stalin advocates socialism in one country, right, where he sort of gives up on the idea of an internationalist proletarian revolution and says, we're just going to hunker down here in Russia, the Soviet Union, and we're going to kind of create socialism here because it's not happening elsewhere, and we just have to accept that. So socialism in one sector is, as we've heard, we've read books like Naomi Klein, like This Changes Everything, Climate Change is About Everything.
A classic.
It's actually, when you look at what needs to happen in terms of decarbonization, it's actually more simple than we often realize. It's basically in one sector. We need to massively clean up the electricity sector, and then we need to electrify all the things that don't run on electricity currently, like our transportation systems and our building heating systems, with heat pumps and things like that. And there's a lot of industrial applications that we could electrify. So really, actually, the climate struggle really does hinge on this one sector of electricity. And a lot of people, if we don't start really massively decarbonizing the electric power sector, which Biden claims we're going to do by 2030, which is just becoming wildly. Yeah. So
that's awesome.
If we don't do that, though, quickly, it's basically that's the material basis for all other decarbonization. So what I argue is that, if we can't win a proletarian revolution by 2030 or 2035 or whenever these new IPCC deadlines, if we can sort of focus really on building socialism or public ownership, at least in the electricity sector, as a path towards not only decarbonization, but also, if we can build public ownership in one sector, it might create confidence, it might create more excitement around public goods and public ownership in other sectors. But that's, at least for climate, at least that's where we can start, and we can just focus on this one sector. And it's a little more simpler than just thinking we have to change everything about society. So start with electricity.
Right. And to retouch on the given proponents at the beginning of the book, this strategy comes from utilizing the working class, not because it is morally superior and not because it is going to be easy, but because it is, by and large, through the numbers, the way to move politics.
Yes.
And so you discussed the difference between so if we're unionizing the electrical industry, the difference between a rank and file strategy and business unionism, because there are already electrical unions, but they're so far pretty conservative. The 2020, I forget the name of the union. Do you have this off the top of your head? IBEW?
Yeah, the International Brotherhood.
They went out for Biden big in 2020. So, electorally, that's not a leftmost flank there. So what is the difference between a rank and file strategy and business unionism? And why will one of those help us pursue our goals in changing the industry?
First thing I'd say is that, to take a step back, is that the labor movement has always sort of looked also like, if they want to build working class power, they've said we need to actually organize in strategic sectors, right? Jane McAlevey, who's done a lot of work, she kind of goes back to look at how in the 1930s, they really did concentrate on like steel and automobiles and coal as like these choke points of the economy, that if you build power here, it can kind of spread, or you can create strikes that really shut down society and create a crisis. So if we want a labor and union-based strategy on climate, I argue we need that kind of focus on the strategic sector. And again, electricity is not just strategic because it's the pathway technologically to decarbonization, but it's strategic because, as you said, there's actually a huge amount of unionization already built up into this sector. It's one of the more unionized parts of our entire economy. It's something like 25% union density, which to many Europeans sounds pitiful, but for the United States, it's like really high.
Good for us. We love getting paid in our 25% of the industry.
So the 25% unions means that there's already existing power, there's already existing institutions in this sector. The problem is, as you said, that these unions are pretty, top down and conservative and so forth. So the rank and file strategy actually argues that socialists, it's actually a strategy to build socialism. And it argues that socialists should get jobs in strategic sectors and become radical militant activists in those unions to try to build a more militant layer in those unions to try to fight for transformative change towards socialism. And so the people that advocate this have shown, like when you look back at the 1930s, when you had these sort of strike waves and huge sort of militant working class movements, it really was like a little small cadre of Trotskyist or Communist Party people who really implanted themselves in those unions and built up and didn't like go in there and be like, listen, workers, this is socialism. We're going to teach you what it is. They kind of like, they actually figured out who do the workers already respect and how can we channel leadership that already exists and build up a movement within the union to make it more democratic and make it more powerful and make it more rank and file based so that those workers can start to feel their power through struggle. And so what I argue is that that's what you need to do to overcome the fact that unions typically are quite hierarchical and top down and are a form of business unionism, which is basically where the trade union bureaucrats kind of align themselves with the bosses and everyone's getting a lot of financial benefits from this. And so to fight that, you actually need this kind of rank and file strategy. So, DSA and others have been advocating this strategy in what are identified as strategic sectors for the labor movement. Like you got DSA members are becoming teachers, becoming nurses, getting union jobs in those sectors. So, I think I make one argument. It's just a suggestion. Maybe people could get jobs in the electric utility sector and start to try to build a more militant climate politics within those unions to start get them to realize that actually these are these workers that are at the core of this crisis and transition. And the key thing I try to point out is that if these unions don't start thinking strategically about their membership and their role in the economy and the climate transition, the green transition, if you actually look at the green energy sector today, the renewable energy sector, it's actually quite not friendly to unions, and it's owned by Wall Street, and it's really private capitalist energy. And so if these unions aren't really thinking strategically, they're going to be destroyed, eviscerated by this kind of Wall Street renewable energy capitalism. And so they actually need to be more to organize to make unions at the center of this transition. As much as Joe Biden says we're going to have good union jobs for climate change, you actually have to win those union jobs. You have to make sure unions are at the center of it. So
they don't just appear. To clarify, one of the things that you point out in this chapter, the issue with business unionism is these union bosses, by being elevated through the organization, are removed farther away from their relationship to production as workers. When they become managers, when they become mediators with the capitalists, their job becomes making the capitalists happy, and that settles on a more conservative politics. So if we want to change the conversation, you have to change the organization, and that fight starts there. I just thought these were such fantastic targets. Going into union density in these renewables, we are getting along to current events. Andrews, I don't know if you had something to chime in with
just
first
one
here,
thing
but
I wanted to ask, because I have heard that there are unions in different sectors that sometimes don't get enough credit for the transition plans that they have developed. If I'm not mistaken, I believe Flight Attendants Union has a plan or like sort of an outline for clean air travel, which is something that you talk a lot in the book about, something that annoys me is academics, especially talking about their own personal travel habits and how they have to band together and make sure that they fly less.
Yes.
And, that sort of,
they're going to zoom in.
Right.
It's because they're doing really well, so they don't have to show up.
Yeah. I mean, that it just strikes me as a type of narcissism, frankly. But but there are plans out there that are not coming from environmental groups necessarily, but the unions themselves about transitions to cleaner forms of technology. Is there something we can glean from that?
Yeah, I think somewhere out there, someone actually proposed this to Sarah Nelson, the union leader and activist, and basically said, hey, there's all these people who have started this movement to fly less and to lower their carbon footprint through refusing flights. And she just laughed and said, like, that's not great for my members and our workers. That's the disaster for us.
Yeah.
And she said very clearly, like you said, like what we need is for our workers and our members to actually, because they do care about climate change. They see that this sector is contributing. It's actually not contributing as much as academics make it seem to contribute. Some estimates are like 3% of emissions. But, if we're going to, these unions and these members want to continue this type of work in the aviation sector. So building up working class power in that sector to kind of force it towards these lower carbon solutions seems like the much more rational path than this sort of fly less, just scale down and maybe even ban aviation travel and shame people on Twitter for visiting their grandmother for a holiday. And like, it becomes really, again, quite moralistic. And I agree, narcissistic politics of kind of shaming and lifestyle choices and things like that. And it's great that Sarah Nelson just laughs at it and says that's obviously not the path.
Right. And it seems like very strange now, but a lot of this stuff seems, it is very far away, a lot of it, but clean air travel, I don't see why that's any more pie in the sky than greening the electrical grid or, a lot of this other stuff that a lot of groups across the political spectrum want to achieve.
We all know about electric cars, and that is reasonable. The idea of putting 300 people on a flight with just a battery propelling you is not realizable right now. So you can't electrify at least, big air travel like you could a car. That said, there's a lot of developments in like synthetic zero carbon fuels that could be solutions. And there's possibilities with green hydrogen out there. And so there's a number of other options. It's not quite an electrify everything situation, but there's options and we can pursue them. I will say there's one terrible option, which Richard Branson, the Virgin Airlines tycoon, really celebrated when he flew in a Virgin flight that was powered by biofuels.
Oh, did he?
Which is like, we're going to devote acres and acres of land to grow, corn or sugar to fuel our air travel. That's a disaster. But
like the French fry cars, but for planes. Does anybody remember those? Like people were putting French fry oil in the cars. Yeah. That was big.
Something like that. Yeah.
No, and there are a variety of tactics you can use to address climate change from the top down. But the situation we're in is the left is out of power. We need to take power in whatever form we can in order to address this in time to resolve the contradiction here. Did you ever read Ministry for the Future, the Kim Stanley Robinson book?
Yeah.
We had him on last year. The conclusion of that book is essentially to create a international climate coin that redirects the entire economy to resolving carbon as money. And, that stuff is all cool. No one who could do that is in power internationally.
Yeah, it was a fascinating book and perhaps more a likely future than building working class power and after decades of working class defeat. But it struck me just like the whole book is about very technocratic solutions, the carbon coin, but also just it focuses much of the story on this one woman kind of climate energy expert who's trying to sway other. Kate Aronoff,
the bureaucrat who keeps getting kidnapped, is the hero of the book. And this is what really got me. I went to school for drama, so I was very cued into this, and that narratively, the big changes that happen in that book are not driven by the UN bureaucrat. They're driven by terrorism and disasters that happen off screen. And then Kim Stanley Robinson jumps out in front of him and waves his arms and goes, but we're not going to talk about what if all of the planes exploded at once. We're just moving on past that because they're extremely dark premises that the rest of the book floats around.
There's no sense that like social movements could emerge besides these kind of terrorist cells, right? There's this one scene where there's this weird guy that they're talking to on television, I think, and he's like this really cynical guy, and they're like, what about movements? Can they solve? And he's like, that'll never happen. And it's just like, it's very bleak. It's, but
he's coming to it at a very interesting angle, but that does bring us back to the current situation we're in. So there's a few different ways we can take this conversation to get yelled at from here. And this is the one I would like to go to is current events. So Andrews and I, this is a New York podcast. The New York Build Public Renewables Act is back in the news. They were trying to pass this bill again. This is a bill that we have advocated for on the podcast. Yep. We both donated our time to help try to get this passed. We called people. Called last week, calling Carl Heastie, asking him to bring this to a floor vote. The Build Public Renewables Act is like the most progressive climate legislation in the U.S. right now. It has not been brought to a vote in the New York government for the assembly for the second year in a row.
It passed the Senate,
yeah.
It passed the Senate, which I know is more optimistic than people were predicting. But essentially, what it does is remove private power providers from their throne that they sit on now and would move more energy distribution to FDR's
New York Power Authority,
the New York Power Authority. And so it would allow for the beginning of a public power transition. New York is like the bluest state in the union. If it could happen anywhere, it should happen here. It isn't happening here. They're now trying to get it passed in a special session in August. I hope they do. Fingers crossed. This would be great. You have some criticisms for the coalition that put this act together and some of the strategic direction there. So why don't you talk for a little bit about the Build Public Renewables Act?
So the first thing I'll say is I think the idea is brilliant. It's, we have this existing massive state level public utility called the New York Power Authority that was founded by FDR and was this huge rollout of cheap hydropower that created cheap public power for millions of New Yorkers in the 1930s and beyond. So we have this utility that exists, and the idea of empowering it to build out clean energy is a really great idea, because for climate, essentially, it's a problem of how we generate electricity. So it's a production problem. And so that's NYPA could develop a new generation. The problem that I see is that essentially when you talk about public power and struggles over the electricity system, there's basically two basic constituencies on what you could call broadly the left that you need to think about. And one is obviously green NGOs, like environmental organizations that are invested in climate action, climate policy. But then there's also labor unions. And as I was just talking about, the electricity sector is heavily unionized. A lot of these unions work for NYPA and work for the New York Power Authority. And then a lot of unionized workers are in this kind of wider electricity system that this legislation proposes to transform. So what I would say is that essentially this public power New York coalition kind of looked at those two constituencies and definitely hitched its wagon to the green NGO side of things. I mean, the coalition, if you look, it's basically the Energy Democracy Alliance, the Alliance for a Green Economy, the We Act for Environmental Justice. It's basically a bunch of green. We Act just received $6 million from the Bezos Fund, by the way. It's basically
get that bag.
It's basically the green NGOs, and I think when you start your coalition with green NGOs, it creates consequences that can alienate you from the workers, from the actual unions in the sector that you're seeking to transform. And so it's a bit unfortunate that we have it's also DSA chapters, right? It's DSA chapters plus green NGOs, but socialists, really, you want to put workers at the center of your theory of change. And it's the workers that have the power in the production system to kind of shape it. And so when you look at what are the unions saying about this legislation, there are a couple of unions that actively opposed the Build Public Renewables Act this session. And essentially the AFL-CIO, the most important union coalition in New York, was opposed up until the last hour, where finally the Public Power Coalition was able to talk with AFL-CIO, get them to do some edits on the legislation, and they moved the AFL-CIO from opposed to neutral. So they weren't even able to get them to support it. And so essentially, and the other thing I would just throw out there is it seems clear to me that the coalition has not really engaged much with NYPA itself, which is, again, a massive public utility that has lots of electrical engineers and market specialists who understand this electric system way better than a lot of us. And it's not clear to me that NYPA, if we pass this, would have the capacity or interest in building public renewables, like building out clean energy, because they would have to compete in the market. It's actually the legislation does not eliminate the private production of energy. It just says we're going to allow a public option, essentially. And so if you put NYPA in competition with these, what they're called independent power producers, who are the main opponents of the bill, they're the real enemy here. And they include solar producers and wind producers and natural gas producers. And these independent power producers have really generous tax credits from the federal government that give them a competitive advantage against NYPA. And so it's not even clear that NYPA can outcompete these damn Wall Street capitalists. So essentially, I think by attaching itself to this NGO coalition, it alienated itself from the workers, from the unions, and it's I think it actually has a very good chance of passing. And if I think it's unlikely to do it in a special session, but I think it has a very good chance in 2023. But I guess I'm a little skeptical that even if it does pass, is it going to catalyze and ignite the type of transformative decarbonization that we think it's going to ignite? And I'm a little skeptical of that, because I think to ignite that, you do need the workers, you do need the unions, and you need NYPA on board with this program. So.
Yeah, one thing I will say in sort of defense of our comrades before they get mad at us and tear up our sweatshop free Buy Damn America t-shirts, there wasn't a different draft of the bill originally that would completely replace Con Ed, which is basically has a monopoly. I like to call them coned, and some of the more private providers, but that was a non-starter with a lot of people. I think that may have been a non-starter with a few unions, if I'm not mistaken. And so it is a process of getting more legislators on board. Right now, I honestly was not surprised that it didn't pass. I wasn't even expecting it to pass the state Senate, which it did. The Assembly, it does have enough co-sponsors to pass, but you can just follow the money
on the vote.
Well, but yeah, he's a big part of it too, but it's not just him. There are a lot of co-sponsors who don't actually want to vote for it because they're getting money from Con Ed. Mm-hmm. So this election cycle in 2022 and next election cycle in 2024, a lot of those people are being challenged by DSA, Working Families Party candidates who are not taking money from Con Ed. So that seems more realistic to me that it'll be in 2023 or 2025 that it gets passed. And hopefully in that time, because this is a process, right? It takes a while to build political coalitions. It takes a while to build coalitions with unions and all sorts of groups. Hopefully by then we will have a broader coalition.
Yeah, they actually had a whole nother bill called the New York Utility Democracy Act, which was the one that would take over the Con Eds, and where I live, it's National Grid. And so they smartly separated the two bills. One's based on generation. That's the Build Public Renewables Act. Mm-hmm. It's based on electricity production. And the other is based on distribution, which is what Con Ed does, what National Grid does. And as you suggested, that's the harder political thing, because you're basically talking about expropriating the assets of these private investor-owned utilities. And that you need a lot of power to win something like that.
I guess it's going to happen by 2030.
Yeah, exactly. We need to, Mark said, expropriate the expropriators. But the Build Public Renewables Act really doesn't have a lot to do with Con Ed, because it's fully focused on generation side. So the real enemies in this struggle are the independent power producers, these the people that own private natural gas plants, solar facilities, wind facilities. And those are the kind of they're the ones that came out at the 11th hour, really vociferously opposing. There's also called the Alliance for Clean Energy, which has a lot of connections with some other green NGOs like the Sierra Club, who actually did not support this legislation because they're kind of aligned with these private renewable capitalists, right? So that's where the struggle over the Build Public Renewables is really against these, which I agree, like they're called merchant generators, like that they're the worst types of people that think we should run our electricity production as a competitive market and have just private control of it. And so that's the challenge is winning over them. And I think we could, because I think we saw there's a lot of support for having this public option. So
yeah, and that the lever, as always, is workers and not the most concerned professional class people you've ever met in your life. Okay, well, we're I think over time, so there are more hot takes buried in here. Anders, do you have anything else to go in on, or should we just call it?
Oh man, so much degrowth bad? Question mark.
Not great. Yeah, not. I know that's not popular amongst a lot of eco-socialists, but yeah.
Do you follow Ben C on Twitter? Do you know this guy?
I think so.
He's like a Pollyanna, and he goes and he's like, we're going to lose all armadillos next year. And then you're like, shit. And you hit the fave button. And then he's like, we got to scale down the world right now. This is the only way.
My good friend, Lee Phillips, who you might be familiar with, he wrote a book called Austerity Ecology and the Collapse Porn Addicts. Mm-hmm. And whenever I see that guy's account come up on my feed, because the algorithm wants me to see him constantly, I just think collapse porn addicts. Like I just see it getting retweeted, and I'm like, there are the collapse porn addicts.
I love it. It's like I drank a coffee every time he shows up on my feed. It's like, shit, all the butterflies, no. But degrowth definitely has its own niche in the activism left. And you make a strong argument against it. I don't think we have time to go fully into the strengths and weaknesses of degrowth, but there is a good anecdote in your book that I think we could talk about here, which is some of the people who advocate degrowth are pretty eccentric. And you describe Francois Schneider, who is a scientist who traveled around on a donkey and moved into a hut to get people to degrow themselves.
A tiny home, yes. It's called a tiny home for frugal living. And he just hiked around rural France with the donkey. And the donkey was carrying all his gear. If you go on, you can find a picture of him. He looks like straight out of the graduate program in my department, because he's got the scruffy beard, the long hair, but also like the North Face Gore-Tex jacket, the nice boots. Like it's just like professional class. He has a PhD in industrial ecology. And I read this in a famous degrowth writing about him as a shining example of what the degrowth movement is. And he talks about how the villagers were bewildered by this guy. And it's easy to see how. But that to me typifies the degrowth politics, which is that we need to slow down, scale down, lessen our impact, but also like do a lot of degrowthers often advocate like really like small scale niche solutions. Like we're going to have more urban gardens, or we're going to have, communal kitchens or bike sharing, or all these like small scale little things. But that, again, the question of how that can build the kind of power to take on the capitalists who control our society is totally never really addressed. It's reminding me, I think I may have put it in the book, that there's a famous sort of political theorist named Jody Dean, who she came up with a slogan, and I think she made a t-shirt of it that says, Goldman Sachs doesn't care if you raise chickens.
Yeah.
And that kind of hits it right on the head, that, you know, like, capital doesn't care if we have our little small gardens but the degrowthers love this. They love donkeys and small gardens and small scale solutions, but we actually need a movement that can really build much more power and build much more mass appeal and resonance for people that, you know, don't want donkeys, right?
In the first world, the question for decarbonization is, how do you move along this track to avoid catastrophe without inciting the yellow vest movement in the suburbs of America, which I would like to see. I think it would be very funny, but would also be a political disaster. So, you know, in what ways is degrowth different than austerity, and how does it work as a bottom-up strategy as opposed to a top-down one?
Yeah, I will say I would love to see, because speaking of triggering Twitter timelines, Matt Iglesias has a new article called "The Case Against Restricting Domestic Fuel Supply." Basically argues this really roundabout, sort of strange, singular Iglesias way that we should continue subsidizing fossil fuels, and somehow that'll be helpful for the environment.
From the author of 1 Billion Americans.
Yeah, would love to get them in a room and just have them rip each other's hair out, or lack of hair. But on the last, I guess, ending on hopefully sort of a positive note, Green New Deal hit the country, hit the news about 3 years ago now. Was it about 3 or 4 years ago?
Almost 4 years ago. Yeah, it's hard to believe.
Yeah, although I will say, my first presidential election I voted in was 2012 for Jill Stein, and her big issue then was the Green New Deal. Totally. So this stuff does take a long time. That being said, has the clock is ticking, of course. I don't know how helpful it is to use the clock metaphor, but has that the ship sailed on the Green New Deal, or is it still a crucial part of a socialist political program?
I'll also shout out, I live in Syracuse, where Howie Hawkins, if you've heard of him, the sort of perennial Green Party. I've interviewed him. So he's an amazing socialist activist, lives in Syracuse, and yeah, he was talking about a Green New Deal long before AOC and all the rest. But I do think when it did blow up it was the fall of 2018, when the Sunrise Movement sat in on Pelosi's office and they called for a Green New Deal, I thought it actually at a mass level had finally kind of created a kind of way of talking about climate politics that is about material improvements, about addressing inequality, about rolling out public goods to the masses of working people in ways that can actually benefit people's lives. So I thought it was a real breakthrough. But of course, like, it's one thing to have a breakthrough like on a rhetorical level, and it's another to actually deliver that breakthrough in actual real life. and so they released a resolution. It was clear the resolution that AOC and Ed Markey released in February 2019 was supposed to be a document, a visioning document, as they would call it, that the 2020 presidential candidates would kind of campaign around. And that's what happened. You know, the 2020 primary, you did have different candidates. Even Kamala Harris said she was for the Green New Deal in the early parts of it. And then you had Bernie kind of emerge as the Green New Deal candidate, and Sunrise Movement endorsed him, got behind him. And so it was this kind of gambit to kind of win presidential power, because there's a lot a president can do. We're really sadly learning that by the lack of what Biden is doing. But we lost that gambit at presidential power, and Biden won. He denounced the Green New Deal in the general election. He said, I'm not for the Green New Deal. And then his policies, even the Build Back Better Act, was just basically a bunch of tax credits for private renewable development. It was not this kind of grand vision of public investment and public rollouts of public goods. So we lost that gambit. And I think the theory of change embedded in the Green New Deal was that you start delivering material benefits to people, and it starts to stitch together sort of political majorities that kind of benefit from these policies and start to start to get behind this kind of movement. And to be clear, it would be kind of this kind of green social democratic type of movement. But if you don't deliver it, people are not going to get behind it. So the theory of change means you really have to start delivering this stuff for people to believe it. Because when I was canvassing for Bernie and like all of us probably in 2020, I would say like, we're going to do Medicare for all, we're going to do a Green New Deal. And most people's response is like, that sounds great. I would love that, but it's never going to happen. Yeah. I don't believe you. So there's this, Vivek Chibber calls it this resignation that the working class feels after decades of defeat. And that's a real hard thing to overcome. And so we definitely should not jettison the idea of the Green New Deal, but we need to wait for the political winds to shift again to where there would be an actual capacity to win state power at that kind of level to start delivering. And we're actually already seeing it delivered on a smaller scale at like the city level, like the mayor of Boston ran on a Green New Deal and she like created like free public transit and things like that. So we're seeing sort of little spurts of it. But to me, it's really hard to win working class movements at just straight shortcut through to the electoral level. Like we're going to win the presidency, right? So there's, as Jay McAlevey said, there's really no shortcuts. We have to build organizational power and working class power in unions and in the labor movement. And that's the kind of real movement that can start to deliver material gains and build confidence among workers that they're part of something that they deserve to win better lives and they can win better lives. And if we can build that kind of institutional organizational power first, then when the next cycle comes around where there might be a way to build more of an electoral majority, we might have the capacity to do it. But right now we just have to put our heads down and get back to labor organizing, I would say, among other types of organizing.
Right. And that brings us on to plugs. If you are a 20-year-old lost in life listening to our radio show, go to get electrical training now. Join a firm. Keep your head down. Don't say anything weird for 6 months. Occasionally bring a beer in for the resident alcoholic because that will warm you into their hearts. And then slowly, much like the infiltrating snake, you start bringing up improving conditions, workplace improvements. And all of a sudden, cut to 5 years, we have a new working class majority juggernaut transforming the entire nihilistic American political landscape into something where there are butterflies, and we love it. Matt, thank you so much for coming on. The book is Climate Change's Class War, Building Socialism on a Warming Planet. Just read this thing. You're going to love it if you like in-depth discussion of this stuff. Where can people find the book?
It's at Verso Books. Look for the black and red cover.
Right. Godfather font.
Yeah, the Godfather font.
Don't go thinking that you're getting a green book. No, This is no Gaddafi stuff here.
No, it's definitely red. It's all about the red.
Have you considered writing a Gaddafi book?
I did worry. I remember telling the publishers that I worried that the red and black actually has anarchist connotations, and I'm definitely kind of not in that vein. But I was assured that it can just have a broader socialist aesthetic, and it won't be seen as an anarchist a tome, if you will, or manifesto.
Right. That is a concern for many publishers. Is the anarchist book surge.
Yeah, that's so funny. I'm sure that's a very Verso discussion, is which obscure political tendency is this cover going to appeal to?
Exactly.
Is it too ultra to make the book purple?
I want Barney on the cover.
As for the rest of us, thank you for coming to Paid Protest last night, June 17th. What a show it was in the past tense. I can't wait for the next one, whenever that will be. We're taking a month off, so not next month. Check back on that. Anders, what are you plugging?
At Anders Lee here on Twitter, and I'm going to bring up the courage to plug my Substack. I have a Substack, Anders Lee here. Embarrassing. Not as embarrassing as having a podcast, though, so I don't feel that bad about it. It's Anders Lee here. I have a short story about a podcaster in Metropolis, if Superman were real. So you can read that at Anders Lee here on Substack, and I'll have some more other political essays, some interviews and stuff there as well.
And yeah, also we have an entire Patreon with twice as many episodes if you would like more episodes, including an hour-long discussion about
Don't Look Up.
Don't Look Up.
Yes.
That was a 50-50 on making people mad. Which one are you? Go find out. Let's talk about the Matrix over there.
And we should also plug, too, ahead of everything, the Eco-Socialist Working Group, which is a national working group, DSA USA. There are also a lot of local chapters with local eco-socialist working groups if you are a DSA member.
I was the chair of Syracuse Eco-Socialist for 2 years here.
Wow, shout out.
Yeah.
Must be nice. Well, that's it for us all here at Pod Damn America. We'll see you at the post office next week. Yep. All right. Bye.